conspiracy.
Ladies and gentlemen, grab your hats. Bring along the kids and all the dogs and cats. Well, it's not X-rated, nothing like that, but it's only a one-night stand. He was a hit in Dixie, the rage in Tennessee. He'll play for you and he'll play for me. He'll accept your money or play for free anywhere across the land.
Yes, welcome to Kauai's only investigative report, The Parksist Conspiracy, Manipulating Minds and Hearts since 1994. We color the news so you don't have to. The only difference between us and the rest of the press is that we fully admit to having our prejudices and don't hide behind that phony cloak of objectivity like the rest of the other so-called journalists. Well, now let's get right to our feature story called We Interrupt Your Community Free Speech Forum to bring you the following important canned music. For the past year and a half or so, Kauai has been enjoying a new sound on the airwaves, our community radio station KKCR. The music on the station has been embraced by many in the community as a respite from the crappy commercial music that usually plays on the airwaves. But for the same year and a half, the conspiracy has been conducting an investigation as to how and why a venture that started out as an effort by a few dedicated community-minded individuals to give Kauai an alternative medium for news and public affairs has turned into a tool of the music industry. Now, don't get us wrong, the music is great. Everywhere we go, as soon as we start to explain what has happened to the station, we hear it.
Dude, KKCR rocks. What the hell are you doing?
Well, don't worry. Nobody's going to eliminate your favorite music or any other kind of music. But there has to be a balance, and the conspiracy has found there is not only no balance, but news and public affairs, especially anything that might be considered controversial, is actively discouraged by institutional processes and even blatant censorship at KKCR. The station has come under the thumb of a group of music industry heavyweights who have successfully staged a coup d'etat in order to kill free speech and replace it with a wide variety of canned music. So, what is community radio anyway, and what's it supposed to be? And what did the founders have in mind when in 1993 they started the process?
According to the widely accepted definition seen here, community radio differs from commercial or public radio in that it fulfills specific needs of community groups. It's a means of self-expression for those who do not have access to the mass media. It's characterized by public participation in production and decision-making and by listener financing. The intention is that the management of the station is in the hands of those who use it and listen to it. It's generally designed to generate programming from the community it serves, as opposed to public radio, which presents primarily nationally produced non-commercial programming. And when the Keikahu Foundation, the nonprofit umbrella group that started KKCR, began, this is the kind of station they envisioned. This is Janet Friend, also known as Janet Planet. She was a disc jockey at KUAI and KQNG in the 80s and was frustrated by the commercial control over content. After she was reprimanded for announcing protests against the Star Wars program at the local Navy base and playing a few tunes that were not on the acceptable playlists, she decided that what Kauai needed was a forum where alternative viewpoints in music could reach the people, one where the people decided what was going on the air rather than the commercial sponsors. Beginning in 1991, Friend spent months on end researching how to set the project up. She found out about a Department of Commerce program under the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, or NTIA, called the Public Telecommunications Facilities Program, which gives grants for startup community stations. She worked diligently for a couple of years or so, writing grants and doing research with engineers and people from other community stations around the country.
I originally started this project because I believed that we needed some kind of forum for free speech, which really wasn't available here on the island. I found out about a process of obtaining grants for community radio through the Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C., so I went ahead and wrote those grants and went forward with the project.
We invited Friend and most of the other founders of the Kekahu Foundation to get together to discuss community radio on Kauai as they envisioned it and as it is today. This is Fred Dente, who, with his wife Marge, was one of the driving forces behind the station. After years of experience with nonprofit volunteer organizations, the Dentes took the concept of a community communicating with itself and put it down on paper, helping to organize a mission statement, bylaws, and articles of incorporation, and writing the grants that would make KKCR a true community-oriented station. Along with Butch Kekahu, who lent his name to the foundation, and Julie Kaniali'i, seen here with her husband, local entertainer Coco Kaniali'i, these were the people who made it happen. Also in the mix was Sally O'Donnell, who moved to the mainland a while back, and Roy Richardson. We'll get to Richardson's story a little later. And we'll let the founders take it from here.
We started this radio station to be a voice for the community, well, it says right here in our statement of purpose, it says provide cultural and ethnic programming, to provide access to the radio media for a local community, provide a forum for many points of view, provide quality community programming, to fill needs that other media do not, which is what I just told you about, to seek out controversial and neglected perspectives on issues, to provide programming that reflects spontaneity and diversity, to provide easy community access.
Competition for the grant came down to Kauai Community Radio or Honolulu Public Radio, and Kauai won because the NTIA generally prefers to fund the type of community radio the founders were proposing.
We originally called this radio station KLEO, which is the voice. Am I correct, Butch?
Correct.
In Hawaiian, the voice. And it's supposed to be the voice of the people. That's what the alternative media is. That's what community radio is all about.
And we had envisioned it as having ongoing programs that would go out reflecting various Hawaiiana and local issues that the rest of the world could then find out about.
A news magazine type of thing where it would happen every day.
I envisioned having phone lines and these kinds of programming daily, like you say. You get up, you get your cup of coffee, you turn it on, and you find out what's going on today on Kauai. And if you have something you want to contribute, you get on your phone and you dial the number and you have a right to say something.
So what happened? How did this noble venture get turned around so the controversy is discouraged and the on-air people sound like disc jockeys in training playing music between slick talk? Without Pavarotti, I would go nutty. Please don't take Placido off of the radio. All right. Nobody's taking away your music. But, as usual on The Conspiracy, a little history lesson is in order.
As we said, Friend was working hard to get the project off the ground, writing the grants and meeting with experts, as well as meeting with Bill Cooperman, head of the PTFP in Washington, D.C. She also incorporated the Kekahu Foundation as a 501c3 nonprofit organization. She, Fred Dente, Butch Kekahu, as well as O'Donnell and Richardson, signed the Articles of Incorporation and Bylaws on March 14, 1994. The bylaws were written so that community involvement would be an integral part of the station.
It was written in our bylaws specifically that the members were all of those people on Kauai that paid to be members and were entitled to participation, to have a public meeting once a year to vote for a new board. In other words, there would be a direct link between giving money to be a member and participating as a member and having the board directly responsible for the duties that they were supposed to be performing to these members.
It was all delineated in Articles 2 and 3 of the bylaws with 13 separate sections that gave all the powers over the community radio station to, of course, the community members who supported the station. It was all very democratic and designed to make sure that no one person or group could control content. The federal grant was designed to see if the community was really going to support a community station, and so $52,000 had to be gathered in matching funds by the local community.
Usually it's enter money, enter problems. But it seemed that Kauai was blessed with people with connections in the music industry who, by pulling a few strings, thought they could come up with some big-name rock and pop stars to do a few benefits and get the money in one big chunk rather than having to do it the way most communities do, a few bucks at a time from many different sources. Though this looked like a great way to raise funds, as we'll see, enter big money, enter big problems in terms of big egos, big schemes, and big plans.
First Kurt Cobain and now this? God, Annie, I'm so depressed. Don't take our music away.
This is Richard Fernandez, a music industry heavyweight. A longtime Kauai resident, he has acted as tour manager for some of the biggest and most respected names in the music industry, among them Bob Dylan and Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. He had started taking an interest in the project in 1995 and had been welcomed with open arms. He had promised that through his connections, the matching funds could be garnered through a series of fundraisers and benefits using big-name musicians, and those who had imagined scraping together nickels and dimes to come up with the money enthusiastically welcomed him. Soon, he brought onto the board of directors another LA music industry biggie, record promoter, and former DJ John Scott, promising that Scott was a big-time charity fundraiser who had organized million-dollar charity golf tournaments. To look at Scott's resume, one would think that he practically invented rock and roll. He claims that, among other things, he discovered Tom Petty and was responsible for launching the careers of ZZ Top and even Otis Redding, and for bringing David Bowie's music to America. He claims that while he was in Memphis, he earned the title fastest DJ in the world, whatever that means. His resume mentions his love for music and radio in seemingly every sentence, but contains no mention of public affairs programming. As a matter of fact, he calls KKCR public radio rather than community radio. His vision is for KKCR to become, quote, a major radio force on the mainland.
Hillbillies in Hawaii get plumb perturbed over folks molesting their hillbilly music.
Well, Scott and Fernandez started to make good on their fundraising promises. On November 6th of 1995, Glenn Frey and the 70s rock icons the Eagles were doing a concert at Aloha Stadium in Honolulu. Frey, a part-time resident of Kauai who reportedly shares a love of jazz with Fernandez, we'll discuss that later, promised to give $1 from each ticket to the burgeoning station. When the check came in on November 22nd, it was for $38,557.50, seemingly putting them well on their way to easily meeting their goal. Only $13,703.50 to go.
Things were starting to come together. An office and station location were essentially donated by the local cable company, which was moving out of its Princeville location and was willing to lease the building to KKCR for $1 a year.
And now that there was some money, Friend, who had donated countless hours, was, according to the minutes of a November 30th, 1995 board meeting, hired by the board to do the job of getting the station on the air. Like many on Kauai, she had been working 3 jobs just to make ends meet and could now devote full time to the project and eat and pay her rent all at the same time. Kaneali'i was also hired part-time to assist Friend.
And with money in the bank, the board did what most people do with money: squabble about it.
Friend had been caught in the Wainiha flood of '95, and her car was washed away, and her house was damaged, and she had just completed a painful divorce. And a growing rift was developing between Friend and the rest of the board, even Roy Richardson. Richardson was one of the original founders who shared the vision of Friend, the Dentes, and others. But increasingly, Richardson seemingly was enamored of Scott and Fernandez and their LA connections in the music industry. The aura of big-name rock stars who schmoozed with Fernandez Fernandez and Scott no doubt helped turn his allegiance to the two. And the fact that Friend was having personal problems, rather than evoking sympathy from the board, evoked rancor and division within the fledgling organization. And in the traditional L.A. money talks and you-know-what-walks manner, Scott and Fernandez now saw this as their radio station project, and the major concern became protecting the money.
Well, at this point, the Dentes, Fred and Marge, were back on the mainland in Washington State. So even though my salary had originally been approved at a board meeting, John and Richard and Roy began harping away at every meeting about the fact that $450 was going out of our bank account weekly. That was for Julie and my salary. They were just so into micromanaging every little aspect of the radio and every penny that they literally wanted 4 people to approve the purchase of a paperclip. Now, over a 3-month period, the entire amount of our salary only was $3,500, which really wasn't a vast amount. Their whole fear was actually ridiculous, that they thought it would impact our getting our grant, because we had to raise a total of $52,000 overall. However, we were allowed to spend some of that money as long as we in fact had it documented that we had raised that amount of money, which we did.
According to Friend, she was working some 60-odd hours a week on the project, but being paid for 40, doing all the mundane little tasks required to get the station up and running, and was trying to leave the fundraising to the fundraisers. But the fundraisers, rather than seeking out more funds, were more interested in hand-wringing over where the money was going. Over the course of the next few months, Scott's wife, Lorraine, was brought in as secretary, and the board started to meet with the specific intention of excluding Friend and Connie Ali'i. The weekly meetings were scheduled for Wednesdays, the one day both said they couldn't make them, and Mrs. Scott began to write up minutes with searing jabs at the two of them, attacked their lack of attendance, and when Friend and Connie Ali'i did manage to clear their schedules for the Wednesday meetings, the board members would often cancel the meeting and schedule emergency meetings on other days, some called with 12 hours notice, others with no notice at all. Finally, on February 24th, they had managed to hold 3 consecutive meetings that Friend could not and did not attend. According to the meeting minutes, it was another dump on Janet Friend meeting. Lorraine Scott's meeting minutes had become a diatribe against Friend, detailing in a misleading and even false way all of her alleged transgressions. According to at least 5 different former board members, some of whom were even supporters of the Scott, Fernandez, and now Richardson factions, Scott's minutes were practically works of fiction, designed to make a paper trail with the intent of getting rid of Friend. And at this meeting, the board rescinded Friend's salary, and it had also taken control of the money.
Friend and Connie Ali'i had an inkling of the takeover to come, but had little choice but to trust Scott et al. To pay out money for various services. In mid-February, John Scott had asked for a single blank check for supplies such as bleaches and sponges to clean this new office. Then he came back for 2 more, one for the phone and one supposedly for paint.
But the only whitewash bought was Scott's story. Scott gave the check to Richardson with instructions to proceed to the bank and withdraw $30,000 and put it into cashier's checks. These were delivered to Scott's personal attorney, whom apparently without official board authorization, he had now hired in the name of the Keikahu Foundation, despite the fact that the board already had hired attorneys to represent them. This is North Shore attorney Paul Sulla. He had been Scott's personal attorney and was now apparently the lawyer for the Get Rid of Janet faction.
Causing problems, so they were nervous that they were running out of time and money. The money had been raised primarily through Richard Fernandez's relationship with Greg Fry and the Eagles, and it was the Eagles' money on their event they did in Aloha Stadium. And he was concerned that they continue the project or give the money back to Greg if it was going to just be dissipated. They were concerned. They wanted to get the station on, but they didn't want to see it all lost because there were some personal promises there. As an attorney looking at this,
that's kind of
getting their whole perspective of their history, I wasn't really crazy about how their minutes were going. I didn't go over it. I took it at these people had the interest in the station. A professional opinion was that group was the corporation. That group could stop at any time and set up a whole new corporation. There was something that they had gained. I guess they got recognition at that stage, but they had to still get the matching funds to succeed. They weren't going to get there.
And as to the $30,000...
I don't know who did it, what happened. All I know is all the money was accounted for. They used whatever means they could to secure the monies, I guess. You and I could speculate, but we don't have the idea on that one. It didn't seem to be off when they did it, and none of the money was gone. It was basically they were trying to protect it from themselves at that stage, is how they looked at it.
Well, Friend tried to battle back as best she could, though someone, it's not clear who, had tried to ensure against the takeover by writing into the bylaws that the board could not remove the president as an officer. This apparently violated Hawaii state law regarding nonprofit organizations. Sulla, Scott, Fernandez, and Richardson seem to this day to see this as some kind of significant fact, but since they had the right to remove Friend as president, the issue is and was really moot. Friend tried to call an annual meeting to alert the members, only to be thwarted. Perhaps her worst transgression in the eyes of the Scotts and Fernandezes was that when the subject of programming came up, she continued to refer to the mission statement regarding the seeking out of neglected and controversial viewpoints, which she saw as the raison d'etre for the station. Richardson apparently agreed, but the Scotts and Fernandezes, who were trying to raise the money, saw this as a possible impediment to their plans. In addition to going to music industry persons for cash, they were devising a way for local businesses to, quote, underwrite the station, and Scotts and Fernandez were heard to say to dozens of people that anything controversial would not be heard on their radio station. We'll get back to this in a bit.
Well, dude, you're bumming me and my family out. I mean, well, what was I saying?
I think you were talking about the dead.
Oh yeah. Jerry, man.
He's alive.
So how to wrestle control of the station when the bylaws stated that the members were to determine the direction? Well, Sulla had an answer.
I analyzed the whole bylaws and made a recommendation. First, I questioned where the membership list was. So who are the members? And having nobody be able to produce that, I said, you guys have problems, from my point of view. Because you've got to know who the members are.
But Friend and Connie Ali'i both say this simply isn't true.
Nobody ever asked myself or Julie for a membership list. We did have one, but Sulla never asked me for one because he basically never wanted to talk to me about anything.
And I discussed with them different changes to the bylaws, which we essentially involved a new set of bylaws that was a director run nonprofit as opposed to a membership run nonprofit. I felt I needed to change these bylaws, and I explained to them why I felt that. For instance, we didn't know who the members were. We could be subjected to a faction showing up at a meeting. You don't know what you're doing, who is going to come. That the station needed more consistency and regularity, especially in its formative stages, because it's a anything-goes situation.
At a meeting called in Sulla's office on March 6, 1996, Friend was forced to bring her own attorney, and the meeting consisted of everybody yelling at and insulting each other. Friend was alone in protecting the public interest, partially because Scott and Fernandez never told Sulla that original members of the board, like Dente or Kekahu, who were technically still on the board, were never even contacted. They had been systematically excluded and conveniently swept under the rug, and Richardson says that he went along with the bylaw changes only as a temporary measure and says that the others told him it would be changed back after 6 months. Well, Dente found out about what had happened when he received an hysterical phone call on the mainland from Friend, who was devastated by the way she and the community in general were treated in the takeover. He was pissed, to say the least, and after returning home to Kauai, wanted to confront the board at the next meeting.
That was one of the things I asked, is what's going on here? Why do we not have a voice? Why did you make all these changes? And why do members not have a vote? And they said, oh, we don't want to have the whole community making the decisions here. That would be, what if some rogue element in the community, or some activists, or some guerrillas, or somebody who was, interested in a takeover, was to come in here and take over the place? We can't have that happening. We can't have this activism. We've got to have it more set up so that, intelligent people are running the show here, and so the community's going to have to trust us. Basically is what they were telling me, is that they did not trust the community to do this, and so they yanked that out of there. They took that out of the bylaws, which we put in. That was the basis of our whole organization, was to have one person, one vote. Or we didn't call it one person, we called it one membership. It was a family or a business or whatever. You get one membership.
Sounds communistic to me.
It sounds, yeah, like communism, doesn't it?
Sure does.
I don't know what it is, but
and the way they took
that's
over
their policy.
Was truly in a hostile way.
Well, the coup was almost complete, but there was that pesky little community to answer to. And this is where Scott and Fernandez shined. They started a person-by-person campaign against Friend, calling and meeting with everybody that they knew who had any knowledge or interest in the project, making up a liturgy of slander that still plagues Friend today. Among the stories told to literally anyone who would listen was that Janet was an alcoholic and a space case, and especially a thief. Everyone was told that Janet was stealing money from the Glenn Fry donation and spending it on groceries at Foodland.
Though this last accusation was repeated to dozens of people by Fernandez and Mr. Scott, according to the financial records, the only money Friend received was her agreed-upon salary, and there never was a check made out to Foodland. But the general demonization of Friend was spreading along the Coconut Wireless until everyone that knew anything about the project was now in sympathy with Fernandez and the Scotts.
Personally, they have ruined my reputation on this entire island. They have told numerous lies about myself, that I'm an alcoholic, that I spent all the grant money on my salary, and many other things throughout this entire island. They have completely slandered my personal self. But that isn't the main thing that I'm upset about. I can handle being shut out of this entire thing if it was as it was set up to be, and it was designed, and it was community radio as we envisioned it.
So, all power was removed from the people. Section 2 of the bylaws was rewritten by Sulla to make the only real members members of the board, and Section 3, detailing the rights of members, was deleted. The board was now self-perpetuating, voting themselves in and out of office as they pleased. Even the Community Advisory Board was, at the time, eliminated. They could insulate the community station from the community with impunity now and go on their merry little way, a clique of rich Princeville-type yuppies carrying their cell phones and playing radio station, as they were characterized by many who knew what had really gone down.
Well, Friend was voted out as president at a meeting she never even knew about. And as to the bylaw changes, Sulla says
she signed, as a board of director, the new bylaws. She consented to the change in the bylaws.
But Friend says that she signed them only after Sulla and the others had agreed to keep in the sections allowing the paying members to vote for the board. She says that essentially they had her sign only the signature page, promising the final version would not include the disenfranchisement of the paying members. Following June of 1996, the Kekahu Foundation became a secret, closed cabal. Sulla was now elected to the board, and all the meetings were closed to the public. No minutes were available, no financial records except the bare minimum required by the FCC, no nothing, especially when it came to Friend. And despite the allegation that Friend's salary was creating financial problems for the foundation, soon thereafter, Roy Richardson was put on salary to run the station. Finally, Friend just resigned from the board.
Janet came with a resignation. She resigned from the board and from her office. And that was, I had no idea what her reasons were for resigning at that time were. It surprised everyone. She didn't ask to address the board. She just said, I'm just terminating.
But friends says it shouldn't have been a surprise. She was denied any records, and Fernandez was now, surprise, treasurer. And she was fearful that she could be held responsible if anything happened. When she contacted Bill Cooperman, the head of the NTIA in Washington, who gave them the original grant money and told them what was going on, he advised her to resign in order to protect herself. We'll let Dente tell some of the gruesome details about what happened next.
Controversial programming was stifled, and free speech was stifled as a matter of policy right from the beginning. A friend of mine who's a local journalist had volunteered to head up a news department at the request of the station manager, I believe it was the station manager, Roy Richardson at the time. And he was going to train a staff of news people and really give us the kind of community involvement we really wanted, as it was pointed out in our mission statement, to provide information and news and public affairs that wasn't being heard on the other radio stations. Well, they went around the room, and John Scott, Lorraine Scott, Richard Fernandez, Roy Richardson, most of the rest of them said, no way is this person going to get on the air with his controversial way of doing things, or anyone like him. Basically, they didn't want to offend the advertisers, the underwriters, by having controversial programming.
And as to Glenn Fry's $38,000 donation,
that he liked jazz, and he would like to hear jazz. Richard Fernandez, the station president, also liked jazz and would like to hear jazz and wanted to do a jazz show himself as a programmer. And subsequently, when the station went on the air, there was a huge amount of jazz being played on the air.
I have seen the greatest stations of my generation destroyed by corruption, wandering through the angry static at dawn looking for a jazzy fix.
Yeah. Although this doesn't really bring us up to the present, we have no records to look at to find out what happened over the next 3 years. But there were plenty of signs that something was rotten in the state of Princeville.
So what's up, Andy? You want to take our music away? Why? Because we're girls? Or is it because we don't shave our armpits or our legs and flop around like prissy little cheerleaders? Yeah, I rock, and yeah, I kick ass, and I'll kick your ass if you touch chick rock.
Well, okay, what's so bad about having mostly music? Nothing, if that's what the community as a whole says it wants to hear. But that isn't the way it is at KKCR.
KKCR has an underwriting rate sheet that they use to guide them in selling their underwriting to advertisers here on Kauai. The scary part of that is, for me, that I see, is that they are selling specific numbers of mentions or announcements to go on the air in return for this money. So the advertisers are getting, they're getting advertising bits and spots very similar to what commercial radio is all about. And that's not what we're doing here. We have community radio here. The danger is that money will control programming.
So, other than the chilling effect on potentially controversial content, other than subjecting people to those annoying ads replete with catchy jingles from the so-called friendly folks at Keone's bargain barn of overpriced and useless crap on what's supposed to be a non-commercial radio station, what else is wrong with selling ad time on KKCR? According to one radio executive, plenty. We were asked to protect the identity of this person due to fear of offending or angering advertisers, but we were told that this is extremely unfair to the existing commercial stations. There's only a limited amount of money available for radio advertising on Kauai, and now advertisers are presented with a low-cost alternative to KUAI, KQNG, and FM 97.
So, what's wrong with a little healthy competition? Well, the problem is we were told that the discount radio advertising rates at KKCR are subsidized with public funds. Tax money paid by commercial stations comes back to KKCR in the form of continuing federal grants each year from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So each commercial station is essentially paying to set up a cut-rate competitor.
I'm on a mission from God. And don't take my blues away.
Don't worry, I'm sure music will always have a place at KKCR. But do you? Well, don't be too sure.
So, what's going on today? Is there any attempt to fulfill the mission statement? According to Program Director Jeff Shefford, also known as Jeff the Chef, the answer is yes. But is this actually happening, or is it purely lip service? For some insight, we turn to Ken Kaimi Stokes, founder and head of the Ho'okipa Community Network and a regular columnist for the local newspaper. With his partner, Nani Rogers, he hosted one of the only public affairs programs heard on KKCR called Taro Patch Talk. Stokes' experience this past year should give a good idea of what's going down at KKCR. We'll let him tell the sad story. We apologize for some of the audio, but what he has to say is worth listening to, even with the pops and crackles.
I was approached by management about the possibility of doing a community news program of some kind. And so I pitched back to management this concept of a show that would feature community initiative. The one thing that I did find surprising early was that we had expected, because they had come to us and we had volunteered to help, that there would be this kind of production assistance support thing. And in fact, it turned out to be, no, just, go ahead. Just do what you're doing. Just let us know. And I guess it's fair to say, in retrospect, we didn't pay enough attention to the last part of that sentence, because our impression from this vantage point is that some of those kind of some of those rules aspects of radio operations were apparently far more important than some of the qualitative concerns that we were focusing on. I suppose on 3 separate occasions, management had come to us and said, it says right here in some types of rule that you're supposed to give us 72 hours notice for what you're doing. And each time we said, yeah, we understand, sometimes we're scrambling, it's not like we're trying to keep you in the dark, it's just, just hadn't been happening, we'll try to do better. We made a judgment call. In the overall scheme of things, it can't be all that important, and that they could certainly, slide with us, at least until we, get more up to speed. But it was a continuing issue, and that program that I described on Kilauea turned out to be one of the, sort of the beginning of the end, because just as we were beginning that show, the station manager walks in and said, so, how come I don't know what you guys are doing today? And Nani and I both turned and said, oh, we got a great show today. We're doing Kilauea. We got all these people. Doesn't matter. I didn't know. And we were, how you're getting ready to go on the air and your adrenaline is starting to pump and you're focusing your energy and so forth. And Nani, just sort of on impulse, said, get that energy out of here. We got a show to do, and closed the door on the station manager. Well, that didn't go over very well. There were a couple of occasions when, as we were on air, there was direct management involvement in the nature of our show. One of them, the first that occurred, actually, I had a caller on the line, we're on the air live, and the station manager appeared at the door going like this, as if, cut this person off. And I was a little shocked by that, but the person was in the middle of some kind of a comment, and I allowed the person to finish, and then just as I was getting an opportunity to say, okay, we're going to have to wrap this up, the station manager came back in and more vigorously going like this. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what is this?
It turns out that John Scott, who according to virtually everyone we spoke to, now tightly micromanages and controls content, was listening and heard what he perceived as a criticism of the station, and called his protege, station manager Mary Cunning, and told her to get that caller off the air pronto. Cunning was handpicked by Scott as manager with a promise to train her, essentially making him the station manager. According to Richardson, who strenuously objected at the time to Cunning's hiring, she has no radio experience whatsoever and of course owes her job to Scott, and so reflects his sensibilities and does his bidding. Everyone we spoke to said she's a stickler for the rules and wields power with an iron fist, as witnessed by what Stokes has said.
I don't respond well to that kind of treatment. So for the manager to come in and give me this kind of signal, I felt was kind of an insult, frankly, to the intent of the show.
And shortly thereafter, the axe fell. Taro Patch Talk was cut back from twice to once a week, and not even face-to-face, but in the most cowardly fashion possible, in a letter.
We're all ready to begin, and it's like 5 minutes to noon, and the program director walks in with this envelope, said, "Here, this is for you." And so I'm opening it up, and I'm reading it, and the clock is ticking down to where we're ready to start. My mouth, I just cannot believe what I'm reading. You know, we're cutting your show back from 2 to 1. You never gave us adequate notice. You never took up membership. You're using our people to run the phones for you. You know, and these what I thought were, you know, fairly minor kind of things. But boom, there it was. And this is the first we'd heard anything about this. Just like boom, you're done. Back to 1 day a week. Pow.
As we said before, Program Director Shepard talks a good game about expanding public affairs. Though he has not responded to our invitation for an on-camera interview, we spoke to him via phone last year, and he promised the moon and stars in terms of alternative local news and potentially controversial public affairs programming, saying he doesn't listen to the board at all, especially Scott, about content. But in the ensuing months, little has changed in that direction. As a matter of fact, it's gotten worse.
According to Shepard, one of the reasons stated for cutting Taro Patch Talk back was that there are lots of other people who want to do public affairs programming. But rather than expand into music time slots, a new program, another call-in show, has just filled in the now vacated slot that Stokes had. But will it be a truly open forum? In KKCR's newsletter, Shepard says that people who call into the new program must, quote, behave themselves.
The question of where and when and how often you would drop community programming into the schedule is a big issue. And I think, again, it goes to this kind of more ego, glory-oriented thing. It seems to me that there are certain times of day that have sort of been set out as like sacrosanct, yeah? You cannot touch those parts of day. And they happen to be the times of day when listenership is probably highest. You know, early in the morning, dinner time, whatever. And so there's not even a willingness to consider what would in effect be kicking one of those people out of a slot to create a more appropriate time slot for community affairs.
And those are music slots.
Those are all music slots. And quite frankly, I am concerned about KKCR because if the way we were treated is like part of that management style, you know, and we're all volunteers, then I think you're really, in a way, kind of shooting yourself in the foot. Yeah, if you got volunteer initiative coming your way, you certainly don't want to push it away. And we've got fairly thick skin too. I mean, you know, we didn't go away till we were really pushed away. You know, there are all these little things that would happen, and Nani and I would look at each other like, do you think they sort of appreciate what we're doing here? You know, are we just sort of in somebody's way? But that's really where I've come down on at this point on the whole question of how do I feel about KKCR. I worry about aloha. I worry about treatment of volunteers. I worry about providing positive feedback for people who are good people, good intentions, just trying to contribute in some way. All of that should be encouraged, whatever stripe or flavor it is. And I hope there aren't many others who volunteer at KKCR who encounter the kind of treatment that we got.
One of Cunning's main complaints was that she thought Stokes was totally unprepared on a few occasions, but Stokes says,
yeah, I can imagine that that management would use something like that because I guess it illustrates to them that this was just too much for us or something.
Bad boy, kid.
They had to help us out by cutting back our schedule.
You better follow those rules.
And since Program Director Shepard takes great pains to explain how responsive he is to phone calls made by the public,
so we asked our friends and neighbors to call up. And interestingly enough, those calls seem to have had the opposite effect. And I've learned subsequently that because they discovered that we had asked people to call, they simply discredited all of those calls.
And Stokes' experience is only the tip of the iceberg.
There have been numerous other instances of free speech censorship, and we've heard from a dozen or more music programmers right here with stories of capricious harassment and censorship of even music. None want their names used because they fear losing their programs if they're caught talking to us.
That's heavy.
Whoa, Daddy.
The programmers tell how Cunning, mostly at the direction of John Scott, has left a wide footprint on content. One story that was particularly telling was how Scott burst into the studio one day and went on a ranting rampage after a programmer played some rap music by the Hawaiian group Sudden Rush, saying KKCR won't play that genre because it's violent and degrades women and blah, 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 blah. And in another incident, Richardson apparently fell out of favor with the junta because he says he was insisting on more public affairs programs and wanted to give the vote back to the members. Richardson was fired from his programming position by Cunning, who, according to Sulla, treated him in an arbitrary and capricious manner, though Fernandez and Scott refused to reprimand her. In a meeting called after Richardson was canned, Fernandez and Cunning bickered and argued with Richardson and other programmers about which type of music should be heard in which time slots, with Richardson arguing for more reggae and Fernandez claiming that listeners don't want it. Richardson and the others also complained about the management style and lack of aloha, but Fernandez and Cunning maintained a defensive stance. Sulla told us that after listening to a tape of the meeting, Richardson's treatment was one of the reasons why he quit the board, although he says the primary reason is that he has, quote, fulfilled his mission of getting the station on the air. Richardson is planning a lawsuit regarding the matter. Everyone we spoke to who's had any contact with the current regime at KKCR characterizes the atmosphere these days as one of tension and hostility mixed with fear and loathing, a place where the type of music being played has become a life or death struggle. No mention is ever made about expanding public affairs.
Whoa, Daddy-o.
That's heavy.
According to Richardson, Scott is now running the station just like a commercial venture. He and other on-air people say that programmers are awarded airtime and slots based on how much money they bring in, and that after the last fundraising drive, the Scotts prepared a list of how much each programmer raised in donations, underwriting, and subscriptions. At a meeting, Scott reportedly threw a temper tantrum and threatened all those who didn't meet their quota with losing their shows. This, according to Richardson, is why there's less reggae on the air these days. It seems the reggae programmers were more interested in throwing an on-air party than coercing people into sending in money. But board member and programmer Donner G. Arman, another of Scott's hand-picked favorites, emphatically denies this charge. At the last board meeting before this report was aired, upon questioning, she unequivocally stated,
But in terms of the programs being selected according to the money that they raise, that's not happening.
We'll probably never know whether she or they are lying, but volunteers we've heard from say that the competition for airtime and money has gotten rid of anyone who won't participate in the envious, backbiting, backstabbing, insecurity, and general conflict and mistrust among programmers that is demanded at the station. The last straw for Richardson was when, during the first fundraising drive, Scott devised a bamboozle to con listeners into contributing by concocting a fictional $500 donor who would only give the money if it was matched. Richardson couldn't believe it fraud by actually lying to the listening public, and says that after that he lost any and all respect for Scott. The whole situation has received much publicity. Here in an article in Honolulu Magazine, Richardson is quoted as saying he feels there is fraud in telling people that they are members when they are not. He says that at the time he went along with the bylaw change, he thought he was protecting the station and, quote, rode on the paranoia. He says that, quote, this thing I created has turned into an effing clique. It's the biggest disappointment of my life. although Scott and Sulla tried to squelch the article before it was printed by sending this letter threatening a libel suit. When the editor of the magazine got the letter, he reportedly told the author that there must be even more juicy stuff to this story, and not only ran the article as is, but said there just might be a follow-up. Even after the article was published, Scott refused to acknowledge the acrimony and dissension. In this letter to the editor, he states that there are no, quote, lingering disputes which are sapping the energy from the station, as the author's article had said. Scott continued saying, quote, all volunteers are happy, and he generally characterized the station as one big happy Ohana. Well, even though some of the new members of the board elected last year promised after the January meeting to raise the issue of returning the power to the people to elect the board, at the February meeting it did not appear on the agenda. As a matter of fact, the board, still trying to be a closed little private club, despite Corporation for Public Broadcasting regulations that state that they must open their meetings and records to the public, made a major stink about our presence with a video camera at the February meeting. And despite the fact that one of the prime reasons the KKCR got the original grant was to be able to inform the North Shore in case of disasters like hurricanes, they still don't have an emergency generator. This has become the responsibility of John Hawthorne, who's asked about it every board meeting and keeps saying he's working on it. Hawthorne is one of Fernandez and Scott's chief supporters and defenders, and according to Richardson, he hopes to get the job of chief engineer despite his lack of qualifications. And as to the issue of what membership actually means, despite warnings from Sulla that the paying public should be called
of course, subscribing members, because we needed to make sure people were clear when they were getting members what kind of members they were. You can't just say be a member without knowing what that meant, and that was my advice, that you have a category.
The board at their meetings, the programmers on the air, and the station at their website still call the public plain old members and never mention that they have no real rights at the station. No one, especially subscribing members, ever remembers hearing the word subscribing used during the recent pledge drive or during any other solicitation.
Well, what can we say to sum it all up?
The current board of KKCR does not want change. There's a faction of people from the Los Angeles music industry who control this radio station as an ego trip, as a glory trip, as a power trip. We want the community wants the radio station back.
Okay, basically what I'm really disappointed about is that I really started this from the bottom of my heart to include all of the community, both with music and as a forum for public speech, that everyone could be involved. And when things changed and XLA radio executives took over and made it a private radio station, it really saddened me that democracy was really not being exhibited on Kauai. My fondest hope is that these things can turn around and the community can once more be involved in the community radio station.
It's we the people. That's what this is. Freedom of speech, freedom to express. It's part of the laws of aloha. If you don't like what brother says, turn the channel. But when the truth is shaded, then it's not the truth.
You know, I'm sure other changes could take place to accommodate everyone's concerns, because and I, for one, have no problem, in my own view, in seeing it elected in part as other, if the boards do. I'm not going to substitute my opinion, though, for theirs.
It's a young station. I think there are enough of us who care enough about coverage of community issues that this conversation is far from over. We're going to continue in whatever way we can to help expand the conversation. And I would expect that once all these personality issues get themselves sorted out, that we can count on KKCR as an asset for that.
So, what can you do? Well, that's a good question. The board and management don't seem to be responsive to the public when a calling or writing campaign is organized, and in general, they don't seem to want to hear what they don't want to hear. We'd only be hurting ourselves and throwing out the baby with the bathwater if we withhold our so-called membership money and donations. But now all the cards are on the table. The board meets monthly, and maybe if we all show up en masse at the next meeting, usually scheduled for the third Wednesday of each month and announced on the radio, and demand some change, someone will listen. Program Director Shepard claims he listens to phone calls and letters. Let's see how much community-mindedness there really is at our community radio station. Only time will tell. You can contact KKCR at 826-7774 or P.O. Box 825, Honolulu 96714, or email them at kkcr@hawaiian.net. Oh, and for the record, John Scott, Richard Fernandez, and Shepard all refused our requests for on-camera interviews for this story. Till next time, I'm Andy Parks for the Parks' Conspiracy.
What the hell you rebelling against anyway, Andy?
Ladies and gentlemen, grab your hats. Ring along the kids and all the dogs and cats. Well, it's not X-rated, nothing like that, but it's only a one-night stand.
I mean, don't we have a right as an individual to say that we don't want to be on his show? Don't I have a right?
In Dixie, the raging Tennessee, he'll play for you and he'll play for me. He'll accept your money or play for free anywhere across the land. Now don't tell him all the roads lead to Rome. The good Lord, goddamn, he's trying to get to Cleveland.
But you're taking people's images that don't want to be taken.
He's the wizard of the harp, the king of tambourine. Drop by to see him and you'll know what I mean. When you get back home, you won't believe what you've seen. He's a jug band medicine show. He'll make your foot keep tapping all through the night. His crazy kind of music makes you feel alright. Well, singing and dancing, this boy's quite a sight. And where he came from, nobody knows. Give him room when he pulls out his bag of tricks. And there's just no telling what he's about to do next.
I don't like having my picture taken and done that. The meeting's not in order, and I don't know why you're taking photographs right now if the meeting's not in order, and can you answer me that?